Okay, Article 15 is the advanced life support article. So I don't know if people want to discuss that now? or
So
wait
I
till the
think
end.
Evelyn had put in your folders the draft resolution that I prepared on this one. So this is one obviously we should talk about.
Right.
And again, this is just a draft that I think, I hope captured the view of the majority of the board from last Monday's meeting. I think I feel more strongly about doing something along these lines than I do exactly what it says. I think we just have to be very clear with the townspeople exactly what our position is, what we're going to do depending on what passes at town meeting, and so that they understand what we're voting on and what we're proposing.
Mark tells me this morning that there's a group that's organizing to basically strip communities of any zoning authority, period. And they are gathering support to try to put through a legislation that basically would make Chapter 40B irrelevant, because you could not discriminate against anyone for anything, for any reason. So basically, local government couldn't.
They up from Texas? We're talking ALS though right now, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah, well, sorry about that, I'm jumping ahead, yeah. Okay. I believe the warrant committee's vote is to recommend a study rather than
Right.
funding at
And
this time.
dismissal of the article.
Yeah. So, I guess people need to make a decision as to which way you want to proceed. That resolution will have to be put in the form of a motion, because I don't believe the moderator allows resolutions on the town meeting floor.
So this is not something to be moved
This-
at town meeting. So this
this
would
would
be a
be for the
resolution of the
selectmen to
board
vote.
that we can publish.
Okay.
And so the townspeople can see, this is what the position of the board is, this is what will happen depending on what passes at town meeting. So I don't intend to offer this resolution at town meeting. The motion at town meeting would be under number 1. But under the warrant committee's recommendation, we would be creating the study committee afterwards.
Okay.
And so I think I'd given to Gus and Pete at our meeting last week a draft of the charter for the study committee, because I think what we ought to have, either way, whether the motion that Gus and I had supported to put the money question to town meeting passes, or whether the dismissal motion passes, the people should know what the committee will do, what the schedule will be like, and so that, because people will raise questions, how long is it gonna take, when are they gonna report back? And so we ought to lay out for everybody, here's what is being proposed, here's what'll happen
Yeah.
in the event that one of those two, and I suspect there'll be a motion from the floor simply to hire the 6 paramedics as well, which would make the rest of this, other than the override, moot. But I think to have an intelligent discussion, at least for the people who would come prepared to understand what the steps are, because once the town meeting is voted, then there's still a fair number of steps thereafter. And I don't have another copy of the charter that I gave you guys last week.
I have
You've got
here.
it, okay. But I think we ought to sort out as much of this as we can now, so that people aren't,
So that's what you passed out last
Right.
week. The one thing that threw me off between that and this is, this sounds like it's 2 different studies depending on how the vote goes?
yes. So I think the schedule, if the, let's call it the selectman motion, the money motion passes, then that means there'll be money available for ALS and to happen right after town meeting, right, once the override has passed. If the warrant committee's motion passes and it's dismissed, I think the committee has less time to do its work. Because I think the warrant committee's view is, if the article is dismissed and there's a study committee, the study committee will come back with a recommendation for next year's town meeting. My view is, if we have voted for the money and we've implemented a private service after the override passes in the interim, we're not constrained by next year's town meeting to arrive at a permanent solution. And so if the study committee goes out and works on the issue, and it's gonna take more than 9 months to work on, if the private ambulance services in place providing these services directly from the public safety building, then you don't have that same time pressure. I think on the dismissal, if it's dismissed, the warrant committee's view is this would be a question for next year's town meeting. So that's, I think the composition of the committee would be the same. The expected timetable for the committee to come back would be different depending on which situation. And maybe not, maybe we still want it to be next year's town meeting. But I think you would not be bound by next year's town meeting if the money passed this year and the ALS, the interim private ALS solution was in place.
Wasn't there also some mention of a special town meeting in the fall on the hospital, that it could be done at that time if there was, if they go ahead with that fall town meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and part of the reason I favor the money question is I don't think there's any way, you're not gonna arrive at any better choices than we have right now by the fall, or even probably by next year's town meeting. I think if the deadline is next year's town meeting, it's still gonna be the question of private service versus 6 versus nothing. I think if the work.
Okay, so that's where I would disagree.
So you think we can have a regional ALS solution by next year's town meeting?
Yeah, I think I don't think that has been vetted. What I didn't understand, that's where we came out in the last meeting, so that's what's thrown me off a little bit. I thought what was happening is that the warrant committee was recommending that a study be done to figure out the best way for the town to approach this. And I thought we were on board with that study. That was going to happen no matter what. Your suggestion at the last meeting was that we basically go with a request for the town to allocate money, and the argument you made was even if we would be in a stronger position to try to negotiate with other towns, should that be an option that we want to pursue, if we actually had the money there, rather than having a theoretical discussion with other towns, and then get to an agreement that then 6 months from now we'll get back to you and let you know if we got approved money. That part I understood. But I didn't see that being quite so structured as what you just described here, I guess.
Well, I don't intend it to be structured. I mean, I think, and this is partially why I put this together, so that people would understand, because there's still people who are saying, well, maybe it would be intercept service, maybe it'd be something else. I think people need to understand exactly we need to understand exactly what we're talking about depending on what passes at town meeting. And so my only thing on the timing of the study committee, so you've got 3 options at town meeting, what could pass town meeting. One could be the warrant committee's motion to dismiss, means we're just basically status quo, we're relying on the good graces of other towns when we need paramedics. Second could be if we put the money motion, the Board of Selectmen puts the money motion on the table to be expended under the discretion of the Board of Selectmen, then that's the second option that could pass. The third option would simply be if there's a motion from the floor to hire the 6 paramedics right away. If that passes, there's sort of nothing for us to do. So there's kind of, we just need to sort of ignore that, right? Because if that passes, we're done. There's no more work to be done on this issue, except to negotiate a contract with firefighters union, all that. So my point with this resolution is to sort of map out the other things that we will do, and so people are clear as to what we would do, depending on what happens at town meeting. So I think the first thing is sort of what is the motion that the Board of Selectmen is going to support at the town meeting. I thought, based on our discussion last week, we would support a motion to allocate the money, a sum of money sufficient to implement any of the options that are on the table realistically. If that were to pass town meeting, we'd put that question on a ballot for override for the ALS amount thereafter, and we would create a study committee, right, to figure out what's the permanent solution going to be. Number 4 under the resolution says, what are we going to do in the interim if the money resolution passes, the money motion passes, right? If that motion doesn't pass, then what do we do if the motion to dismiss passes? And I think that's also a study committee. So the only question on the study committee, from my perspective, is I do think the timetable for the study committee may vary depending on which of the 2 options passes at town meeting. In that, I mean, my view is if the motion for the money were to pass at town meeting, my position would be to favor issuing an RFP now, right after the override, for a private service to provide ALS services for a 1-year period or whatever that time is, so that you would move towards what I would see as an interim solution, while the study committee is reviewing, negotiating with other towns, doing the rest of the work they're gonna do it, to come back with a permanent recommendation. I think if the warrant committee's motion passes to dismiss the article, I think their view is that the study committee should be back with a recommendation for next year's town meeting. And that could be true under either scenario. But my only point is that if there's an interim private service in place, there's less pressure to come back with a permanent solution by next year's town meeting. And so that's why I sort of wanted to lay out all the different options that we would have here so we can discuss them. Like, 'cause
You need to
these-
look, you need to look at the procedure too, because if the warrant committee doesn't have a positive motion, then the moderator's gonna ask if anybody has a positive motion, and you're gonna decide if you're going to make a positive motion, or who is.
And so that's number
That-
one,
that's-
which was the motion that we had talked about the
Right.
Board of Selectmen would
Right.
make to put, to, the motion written in number one here, which is where I thought we we didn't land on the number last week, but we at least landed procedurally, the Board of Selectmen would, majority of the board would make that motion.
So, let's see. So I have to look at how it's written, how it's art. There's a single,
It's 15.
yeah, no, there's a single article. It's asking for appropriation of a sum of money for contracting. So the way this is worded right now, it's to either hire or contract for it. The warrant committee is recommending a study, which is, I'm trying to think the mechanics here. Warrant committee has a negative motion, recommends a $25,000 study,
Well, they
which would
recommend
basically
dismissal
be an
of this,
amendment.
they
Yep.
recommend dismissal of this
So
article.
how does, where will the $25,000, approval of the $25,000
Reserve fund
study come?
transfer request.
Just through normal operating, not through town?
Correct.
Or you could do it as an appropriation, that, 25,000 doesn't require an override. They could take that out of free cash.
Yeah.
Right, but their recommendation is dismissal of the article and a request to the Board of Selectmen to create a committee and then to make a reserve fund transfer request to pay for the study committee. That's what the warrant committee's recommendation is.
What, as I've heard from more people since this has come up, there's a few things that have registered with me. One is the idea of relying on mutual aid for some period of time is not out of the question, that it in fact could be feasible. So this idea that either we hire or we contract, I'm hearing too much about the possibility that actually it's not the emergency that it appears to be.
I don't think it is either, personally. I mean, we only have an ALS call
Right.
every second day on average. And,
So what I
and I think that there might be a benefit to the towns
Right.
that are providing the mutual aid, because we're paying them.
Right.
And they have underutilized services that they're then getting more return on. So I'm not convinced that the other towns wouldn't
Right.
be happy to continue providing that. I'm not,
What I,
Oh.
what I liked about the way we had talked about this, our position last meeting was, it allowed us to let some time play out. So the money was there at the point that we feel we need to do something. If the taxpayers will trust us to use good prudent judgment, then we don't automatically just pull the trigger right after. We actually have the money, we use it if we need it. But the different directions it could go, or it could potentially be hiring, but probably not until a new chief is there. It could be contracting, but only if there's clearly if this threat that the other towns won't continue mutual aid, and given that we are on a track to do something, if we were just saying, we'll just let it go, that would be different. But the fact that they've supported us for the past several months, to ask them to support us for another 6 months or something like that doesn't seem out of the question. And then this other question around regionalization or teaming with other towns, that has not been vetted. So that's the thing I'm hanging up on. I have to admit the comment that came in the last meeting around the training of paramedics. And I've talked about that up with a few people and say, oh no, just go to Norwood Hospital. I'm trying to picture every town in the region all deciding that their training strategy is to go to Norwood Hospital with their full complement of paramedics. That doesn't feel like it's going to be a practical solution in the long run when everybody's up and running. So it's got more to do with wanting the time to actually vet these things. It's not like I don't want to do something about it.
Right, and so I mean, I think sort of just to kind of tick through kind of the issues as I see them. So the first question is, what's the motion going to be at town meeting, right? I continue to favor a motion that would appropriate a sum of money for purposes of implementing ALS to be expended under the direction of the selectmen. Then the second question is, what does the study committee look like? And I think that the questions that will be most important in people's minds with respect to the study committee, and maybe I'm wrong that the outcome of the motion doesn't affect the charter of the study committee, but I think people are going to want to know who is going to be on it. Not necessarily which human beings, but sort of who are the categories of people who are going to be on the study committee, and how long are they going to take? Right, because you may have people have a view that they're sympathetic to the view of dismissal, or they don't want an immediate permanent solution, but they want to know this is not going to be a 3-year odyssey of study committees. And so that's kind of where I came at it with putting the charter together. Third question is the Prop 2.5 override. And I think we do have to be clear with the people of the town that we would support putting the override on the ballot to effectuate the decision of town meeting to appropriate the funds, either in response to our motion or in response to a motion from the floor that chooses a different path, right? Because ultimately, it's the selectmen who decide on the override, and we could conclude that, and I don't think we should, but I'm saying it would be our option to say, well, if something passed that we didn't like, we wouldn't put an override on the table. And so a town meeting would then have to figure out how to pay for that option out of the funds within Prop 2.5.
Yeah.
Right? So then the fourth thing is what happens in the interim. So I think what I'm hearing you say, Gus, is that if you favor the money motion passed, you would really see that as delegating to the selectmen to make a permanent decision with that money at some point.
Not necessarily, no, take action as appropriate in the coming year.
Okay, so then
so
that brings
there might be-
to me to number 4, right? So number 4 is, one option here is the interim option, right? Because my view is that if the majority of town meeting has voted in favor of the money, and a majority of the town, that's a majority, right? It'd be a majority.
Yes, majority.
Majority of town meeting votes in favor of the money, and then a majority of the voters in override vote in favor of the override. That's a pretty clear indication that people in town want this service and are willing to pay for the service. And so my view then would be, after that vote is completed, right after town meeting, we'd create the study committee right away. They would go to work in May. The override election would probably be in June, right? First Monday in June.
I would think
probably
so,
be
yeah.
the override election. And so once that passed, my preference would then be to issue an RFP for a private service to provide this in an interim basis. And that would have 2 benefits. One, it would implement what would be then the clear will of the town at town meeting and an election to have this service. 2, it would give us the best data we could have on what the real market is for a private service to provide this. Because there's a quote that's been provided. It was provided sort of in the context of kind of informal discussions, not in the context of there's going to be competitive bidding. And I could see a circumstance where private companies would say, here's our chance to bid on this, and show that not only can we have the best price for this interim, but that this is the best permanent solution, right? Because there's an amount that's been quoted for $570 or whatever. Who knows? It could be a lot less if some private services think, well, if we can really beat the alternative, and then maybe that becomes the permanent solution. But but some of the pressure of, because I think for everyone who gets up and says, I don't think mutual aid is really a problem, other people who have sufficient and very significant credentials whose views we should take seriously, including the chief and others, will say otherwise, right? That's not, we can't continue with it. And I take that view seriously and with due respect. And so if the idea is that the best solution here is going to be a regional one, I don't think it can happen by next year's town meeting. But then you'd have the private option in place. There'd be no concern that we have any interruption in services, and you sort of have the most time to implement the best long-term solution.
So I think you're worried about an opposite thing of what I am. I want to come back to the 650,000 because I'm sensitive to it's an override. So if we think that's not what we need, I think we should put in what we, reasonably think we need. The highest number I've heard so far for that contract is 600,000, so, and the chief came in with 573 for staffing, so I'll push on the number, but not the principle. I'm actually worried about the opposite of what you're worried, where I think you're coming from. You're basically saying, listen, if the people say they want it, we want to make sure we have the money and we'll put it in place. I'm actually worried that there are more people who are going to come in and say, I don't want to approve $650,000. And I could be wrong, but the communications I'm getting are running far more in the direction of, this is a stampede you don't need to be stampeded into doing anything about. And for that reason, I'm actually trying to say what would be a reasonable amount to ask the taxpayers to approve, with the understanding that, and this is a leap of faith, I don't know if they'll do this, trust the selectmen to use their judgment to use that money prudently. But I'm actually coming from the standpoint of trying to get money trying to ask for an amount of money that I think there's a better chance might get approved than 650,000. If you're right, and most of the town really wants this, and they don't care what it costs, and there are some who feel that way, you're right, we can just go here, we'll get it, we'll lock it in, and we're good to go. I'm actually worried about the opposite.
Well, can I amend?
Yeah.
I'm not worried about either of those things, right? I mean, what I'm worried about is that whoever, I don't have a view as to who the majority is.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. I want to make sure there is an option on the table that's viable, that's not simply between making a 30-year decision to hire 6 people and sort of just proceeding with the status quo and a study and maybe something else that's coming back, right? To me, I think we need to arrive at a considered permanent decision about this issue. Most other towns have gone in this direction. That, from my perspective, that considered permanent decision could be, we just don't need this level of service, right? That there's only one call every 2 days. We're reasonably confident that maybe we have to juice up the mutual aid a little bit and pay a little more, right? Maybe we've got to pay the other towns, instead of splitting the insurance revenue, we've got to just give it to them wholesale every time they come. I mean, there's all sorts of things.
Over time, through attrition, we'll have a paramedic service.
Right. And that could be a considered decision, that we've considered all the options, we've evaluated the risks, we've presented to the townspeople. So I don't know that we need to make an absolute permanent decision. So what I'm trying to offer here is a middle ground, to say, if the majority of people are against this, then to a certain extent, then the time pressure is also off. Right? If people vote down the money and they vote down the hiring of the 6 folks and they're comfortable with the current situation, I think we still want to study it. I think we still want to get the best information we can have. We want to have serious discussions with other towns. We want to kick the tires on all the legal issues. Everything that we want to do, we can do. But in that situation, the time pressure is off too, because the people have indicated that they're comfortable with where we are. And to me, this is a classic situation where it's a value judgment for the people of the town, right? This is a service that could be provided. You could have it. It's not going to hurt the town to have the service. It's not going to bankrupt the town to pay for it. It's not going to drive people out because of the taxes for this particular increase. But really, it's something for people measuring, do we want the service or not? And if we want it, we're going to pay for it. But I'm a little more concerned on the implementation side, that we have the best chance to kind of vet all of the potential long-term issues and come up with the best solution, which I'm not convinced we're at that spot.
So we're in agreement on that.
Yeah.
But my point is, I am worried that a $650,000 operating override won't get you that. It will get you an all up or all down vote. And if it's a down vote, then basically it's at least a 1-year decision to do nothing, because there's no funding to do it. Where I'm coming from is trying to get somewhere that's
So I see the 3 of us agreeing on the study.
Yeah.
Where I part
Yeah.
is that I think the money should go back to the town meeting, and that they should have a say in that, rather than just trusting the selectmen to implement it. And so that, I guess, what I'm thinking is that, is there some way to just start with the motion being to do the study, and if that goes and is passed, then have another motion to deal with your issue about the money, to see if the town has an interest and an appetite to put money up and to assign it to the selectmen to make some sort of decision. If the town wants to do that, I'm not adverse to making that decision for the town, but my sense is that the townspeople would prefer to have that decision on their own. And so, and I think the timing, when I look at the timing, I think it's gonna end up at next town meeting anyway, because the study committee is gonna report back, I think you had them reporting back in December, and we're pretty close to the tracking into the new town meeting then.
But I just wrote that down on a piece of paper. I didn't evaluate whether that was actually possible. Right? I mean, 'cause
I think they can get
just-
Pete, I don't think you need the motion for the study, though, if that's something that can be funded. I think it's appropriate for the warrant committee to say that's what they want. It would be appropriate for us to say, we think no matter what happens here,
There should be
we
a study.
agree, but you
Yeah.
don't actually
Well,
need to have.
I just think the
another
town
motion
meeting
for that.
needs to understand that
Right.
there is gonna be a study.
Right, yeah.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to lay out here, sort of so we, and each of these, we don't all have to agree to each of these steps, but kind of on each of these 4 issues, where is the majority of the board, right? If these things happen, what will we then do after, how will we proceed after town meeting? That's what I'm trying to just make sure. I don't want to have uncertainty in people, either in our minds about what we've pledged to do, or uncertainty in the minds of the people of the town about what's going to happen depending on which way these various votes go. Because I worry a little bit too, Gus, that there may be people, and again, we're all just speculating about what people think based on our anecdotal interactions with them, but there may be people who would like to see this service, are sympathetic to the view that there's a better way of doing it than the options that are on the table, but there's going to be one concrete option on the table, right, which is to hire 6 new paramedic firefighters and expand the department that way. And if it looks like it's a choice between a study committee or doing that, you may have people who say, well, I'd like to see this study, but I also want to make sure we have the service, who would say, well, we'll just go with the 6, which I think there's at least a consensus in this board that as of right now, that's not the right way to go. That hiring 6 new.
Correct.
Right, particularly, we have no fire contract, we have a transition as fire chief, and even if that turns out to be the best solution, there's enough uncertainty about the circumstances under which that would happen, that we're not ready to do it right now. So, I mean, I just want to, I guess my principal concern is that we're clear about what we're going to be proposing at town meeting, we're clear about what we'll do after town meeting if,
So I just make the comment, relative to the conversation we had at the last meeting, which was allocate money, trust the selectmen, and I'm sympathetic with you, Pete, about just, trust us, we'll do good stuff with the money. This is saying, if you pass this first thing, we're either gonna contract or we're gonna hire. That's the direction to the Board of Selectmen.
no.
That's what it says.
No, so this is gonna, well, it's designed to, the motion is designed to track. Right, it's designed to track the warrant article.
I don't see a lot of wiggle room. I mean, how you do it is here, but this says we're getting ALS
Yes.
services,
Yes.
one way or the other.
Yep.
We're not figuring it out. In other words, if the study came up and we found out a plan, if we found out in October that Millis wants to go in and they have half and we need half, and it makes sense that that's a long-term 5 to 10-year solution, that's a great thing, but we're gonna wait 6 more months until the next town meeting to do anything
No.
about it.
I think that was.
This doesn't build in the kind of discretion that would let you wait and do nothing.
It's intended to be.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah, so the intention of the motion, and I may have just
Okay.
drafted it poorly, was that the money would be appropriated to be expended under the direction of the selectmen for the implementation of advanced life support services.
Okay.
If in that implementation, we reach a deal with Millis, I mean, I would want the motion to permit us to sign an agreement with
okay,
Millis in
then-
October
okay.
and go ahead.
Okay.
Right, as long as it's less than 650. In my view of it, it doesn't have to go back to town meeting. We may decide we want to go back to town meeting with the final, resolution of it, but it doesn't have to be. And so that was what I was trying to accomplish. I may not have
Yeah.
written it correctly, but my intention was to give the board discretion between contracting, hiring, with the understanding that if this passes, people are saying, we want the service, but we'll leave the implementation of it. So the only option that would be off the table would be for us, we couldn't then say, you know what, we don't need it.
Okay.
We're fine with basic and mutual aid.
Pete, to your point, the only issue, because I'm predisposed to be exactly where you are, tell people what you're gonna spend the money on, spend it. The only issue is that plan puts us a year off. If this gets shot down, that plan puts us, we won't be in a position to have that conversation for another year. And that's the one thing that concerns me a little bit, that says, no, we're just not gonna do anything for 12 months. It's just one of these weird situations.
I'm not convinced it's broken at the moment. I mean, I know that we're not where we want to be ultimately,
Yep.
but I think it's working at the moment with the mutual aid, and I don't know that that's not going to work for another year, so I don't see an emergency situation. And I want to get the new chief in, I want to examine the different options, and I'd kind of prefer to move to the final solution rather than an interim solution of hiring a service for a year, but, you know, if the town wants to spend the money to hire a private service for a year, I don't, you know, that's their decision, basically.
So I guess the first question then is, what's the motion we're gonna support at town meeting? Sounds like, Pete, you're not gonna support any positive motion. So Gus, what is the,
So the motion you have here, if it really says what you just said it says, which it gives us the discretion to do it, as opposed to what felt to me a little more prescriptive here, I would be in favor of that. I did want to go back to the 650 and ask why that's the right number.
well, let's ask our town council, Mark, as this motion is drafted in this draft resolution, would that give the selectmen the discretion to expend it?
I don't have a copy of it. Is this it?
Right here.
This is not,
Resolution.
this is what we're talking about there.
So what's the question?
Would we have discretion to expend those funds either on a private contract, hiring town personnel, or entering into some sort of regional agreement with other towns?
Yeah, it just simply says for the purposes of providing advanced life support services. It doesn't say how. It's very broadly worded.
What we have right now is
As
It's
long
the
as that-
same thing.
Yeah, we'd want to make sure people understand that's what we're asking them
He's
to
got the
do,
same.
is to approve the funds with the idea that we will,
Life support services.
we may take some time to figure out what the right thing to do is. As I read it, that doesn't jump out at me.
Well, that's where we get down to number 4. So, in the. in
But
the-
number
in the-
2, we're in agreement
in the
with.
decision
We
tree.
want a study
Right.
committee, we're okay there.
Right. And so 2 are in the study committee, and I guess the question there would be, though, if you have comments on the charter, because I think it would be helpful to this discussion if we were to have in advance what the charter of that committee would be and the composition of that committee would be.
So number 4 is the place where that probably reinforced my notion of what number 1 was saying, because this says we're going to issue a request for
Right,
proposal.
so this is a draft.
Yeah,
So in other
yeah.
words, if under number 4, a majority of the board opposes number 4, then number 4 won't be part of the resolution. So I put in number 4 as this is my view of what
Okay,
I would do.
okay.
But I think we should tell people what we will do. So if the idea is that, my view is if 1 were to pass, then I would favor doing 4. But my view here is just that on each of these 4 issues, we should take a position, and then people will know. And so if your view then is, Gus, that if it passes at number 1, you're not going to favor any expenditure of funds until you have a permanent solution, right? Then our answer on 4 would be.
Let's not talk about it as a permanent solution, let's talk about it as, one solution if you contract is not a permanent solution. It's just saying, no, they were right, the mutual aid is not, we are getting pushed back, 3 months, 4 months into the fiscal year, we are getting pushed back, they're getting tired, we need to do something. So I wasn't automatically seeing this interim year. The issue we have is, I view the provision of ALS level services at or above the current intercept level of service as a given. I don't think we have any intention of accepting a degradation of service below that level. Right now, it sounds like the mutual aid is capable of delivering that level of service because of the relative lack of demand on all of the ALS services in the surrounding town. So it's an option, it seems to work. Whether that's gonna last for another year or not is the piece, like you, Pete, I look at some numbers and I might be inclined to say, I think you're right, but I listen to the people in the fire department and maybe we're not. They should know better than I do, at least, about what the tenor of the support is. So I'm looking and saying, so we're playing for a little bit of time, we're playing for time to get a new fire chief in, because that's probably the person that should be driving a lot of where that direction goes. We're playing for time for a study committee to explore and validate the issues around whether or not there's any appetite for collaboration among the towns, if only the ones that don't yet have their own services, but perhaps some of the ones that do. I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't accept, a couple $100,000 off their budgets if it made sense. So there's some and then on top of that, the operational issue of training of paramedics is a bigger issue than I realized until I heard the other day. So I'm playing for time to get smarter, to not let the emergency of having lost our contracted service, which is driving a need to come up with an alternative ALS level of support. I'm trying to keep that separate from the issue around staffing. And that's,
So I think then, all right, so then number 4, though, I guess, so let's say, we'll come back to the number
Yep.
on number 1.
Yep.
If 1 passes, then sort of, I guess 4 is the 4 issue is, I did this as the interim question, but this is sort of what are we gonna do pre-permanent solution, right? And so, if it sounds like, Gus, what you're saying is your position would be nothing immediately. So, the town meeting passes Article 1, passes the motion at town meeting. Under your view, then, the next thing we would do is, at our next meeting, we would create a study committee with a charter, hopefully, that we've agreed to in advance. Then there's a Prop 2.5 override election in June. If that passes, then you would stay with the status quo of, and I know the chief bristles at calling it mutual aid because it's not mutual. You would stay at the status quo of relying upon paramedics from other towns as long as we can. And while the study committee is doing its work, if at some point during the course of that time, before the study committee is done, it becomes clear that relying on neighboring towns under the current setup isn't going to work, then you would favor going out with some sort of temporary, either a
Yeah.
private contract or sweetening the pot to the local towns and saying, I know you don't want to come to split the insurance proceeds, maybe it'd come for $1,000 a call or $500 a call.
so maybe, yeah, actually, as you're talking, it's clarified my thinking. The way I would look at that is I wouldn't want to make a permanent hiring decision until the new fire chief is in place and up to speed.
Agreed.
And I wouldn't contract for ALS support until such time as it was clear that the mutual aid that we're relying on is inadequate, or otherwise, we're getting pushback from the
It's not
towns that they're not
broken,
happy
yeah.
about it.
So-
That's why I'd like the money there, because if suddenly come September, we've used up our goodwill and we have to do something, then we can do it. But I wouldn't do that until I knew that either operationally or just dispositionally, we had a problem with the towns that are providing mutual aid.
So I'm pretty much in agreement with the way that you've segmented that and laid it out in a chronology. The only place I differ is I think the townspeople are gonna want to say in the ultimate solution, instead of
Yeah.
just handing us 650,000 and saying, trust us.
And so my strategy on that, because I think the higher that number is, the more likely, Pete's absolutely right. If it gets down to something, just to put a number on, I'd say it should be $500,000. And where I'm coming from is it's below what the staffing cost would be based on what the chief came in with. So it's a cheaper alternative than to just pull the trigger. But I'm actually being a little cagey here, trying to pick a number that I think there's a better chance could get approved as an override than I fear 650,000 might.
Well, I'm just opening my computer to edit this resolution then. We can keep discussing, but it sounds like, I can agree with that, Gus. I mean, I can agree that what our number 4 would be then to rely on other towns as long as we can. If we aren't successful, then we would then put out a bid for a private contract, even if the study committee's not come back. We won't agree to permanent hiring until there's new fire chief in place. And I would probably add to that, and we have a collective bargaining agreement in place with our union as well. I don't think we should be hiring new people if we don't know the terms of their employment.
You all have been good. Yeah, you've been listening.
A few questions. One is, it's more a comment than a question. This issue has been such a controversy for so long, and it's a complex issue. I really cannot at all picture the townspeople being agreeable to and trusting the three of you to make a permanent decision. And it seems to me that the way this is written, if they're unwilling to do that, then your entire plan falls apart, and there's no alternative, there's no plan,
Oh, it's push
because
for
it's all
coffee.
tied together.
Yeah, we have a
Well,
study committee
there's
that
two
looks
other
at it.
alternatives, right? If they don't agree to this, if the town doesn't favor this.
The two alternatives being,
Doing nothing or hiring 6 new paramedics.
well, right, but you have a study committee that's going to be looking at this issue, and I don't understand what the urgency is around not allowing that study committee to present its findings and then have the full town meeting in a year decide what to do. And in the meanwhile, offer the voters choices between, okay, let's forget about the study committee, we don't need the study, we want to hire 6 paramedics, which, it seems like a bit of a long shot, or then going with the current mutual aid or contracting out. So they have the option of choosing among some short-term solutions while the study is going on. And then when they're presented with the results of that study, they'll be more equipped, I think, to make a decision for the permanent
So from my
solution.
standpoint, the one thing that, I agree with everything that you said. The one factor is that the chief has raised the issue that we might not be able to rely on the goodwill of the surrounding communities to give us that mutual aid, given that we don't
Right.
have our own ALS.
But there's-
That's the driver, is basically we're getting advice from a guy who ought to know what he's talking about,
Right.
that says we might not be able to hold that together for a full year.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think in that event, the townspeople would be willing to entrust you to come up with a short-term only solution to that issue, should it arise.
But the mechanics of funding it is the issue.
Right. But you're tying in the idea of they're giving you the discretion to make a permanent decision.
Yeah, I didn't see it as
Without-
permanent. I saw it as
Okay, then I'm
figuring out how to
misunderstanding.
make sure that we don't sink in this coming year.
Okay.
But
So-
in fairness, if suddenly we found out that Millis, I'm picking Millis, suddenly said, yeah, why don't we go in together, and we suddenly, instead of hiring 6, could hire 4, and that might be a reason of, so half the cost of
Right.
what a full complement would be. You raise a good question. I don't know how we would get an endorsement of making a decision to go in that direction, but that would probably be a long-term solution.
Okay.
If we have a town meeting next fall, like we should, then we
Yeah,
could
I mean,
always
I-
get an endorsement.
I think we're all operating, Chuck, with imperfect information about the views of the citizens of the town. And so I think what I hesitate to say this is our plan, in the sense that this is a plan, right? This is one way to go about it. If the town meeting doesn't want to make a permanent decision this year on the one sort of permanent option that's on the table, but also are not comfortable with the notion of dismissing the article and leaving it to a study committee that could take a year, could take 2 years, it could take, 3 years. I mean, there's some precedent for committees studying issues in town taking longer than anticipated at the outset. And so I think we want to make sure that that concern does not push people in the direction of a decision that they may not favor really, but are concerned that this is just going to be thrown to a committee and then nothing is going to happen for 3 years.
Okay.
I think that the committee is going to operate pretty expeditiously. I think we're going to be, we'll have an answer at the next town meeting, I'm pretty confident.
I mean, We've said that about the hospital committee as well.
I'm not as
Several,
confident on that.
for several seasons and there, the jurisdiction has expanded. And again, all decisions have been made, they're fine, but I think there is a concern that people look at it and say, well, that was not necessarily an efficiently managed process overall by the Board of Selectmen. Why are we going to trust the Board of Selectmen to create a committee that will efficiently examine an issue that is vastly more complicated than the hospital question? And so what I'm trying to do by putting this, putting some structure around this is to give people some confidence if they go the warrant committee way or if they go the Board of Selectmen way, that there will be at least some enforced structure around who's on the committee and how it's going to work and what's going to come back with it.
Just if I can put my 2 cents in terms of looking at regionalization is not going to be a one-year process. Partly because you're then asking those towns to go to their town meetings to decide whether or not they want to regionalize. So I think even if we decide regionalization is an option, I don't see it as a one-year timeline. We can agree to it next year. It's going to be at least a 2-year discussion.
Because you also have each fire union to negotiate with as well.
Well, that was my second piece of that, is that I'm concerned about what you said, that we don't want to make any hires, if that's where we go, until the collective bargaining agreement is in place. We have not yet been able to come up with a collective bargaining agreement that's lasted longer than a year. We are constantly bargaining basically in arrears. We don't have a collective bargaining agreement going forward, so I am concerned that that could hold up if we choose to do the hiring issue. Negotiating that contract could hold up the hiring, and we're going to have an interim solution as well, if that's one of our
The other thing is
concerns.
regionalization is not just one approach. You can have an intermunicipal agreement with one or more towns. You could also create a district. Either one of those approaches have pluses and minuses. A district generally requires special legislation to set it up.
The Collins Center for Public Policy at UMass Boston has been doing studies like this for different towns, so I reached out to them today to see if they could send us some examples of opportunities that they've seen and been able to work on, so hopefully we'll hear from them soon.
Right. And that's what I was getting at with sort of the timing question as well, Gus, with the money. I agree with Christine. I do not think there's any, if the deadline is next year's town meeting, the choice is going to be a private contract, doing nothing, or hiring 6. Those will be the choices. And that's why when I talked about in the charter that you have to have a timetable geared towards that. I mean, if the goal of the study committee is to move us towards a regional solution, I just don't see that as something that can be done on next year's town meeting schedule.
Well, to Mark's point, though, there's regional, and then there's this a partnership with one other town, and that is,
More than one.
yeah, but
Right.
it's a little different than a full-blown regionalization. It's just some way to get there with less staff than you might otherwise.
Or Mark just pointed out that there is an exception in Chapter 30B for ambulance service. They do not have to be put out to bid. You can.
For our contract service?
Yes. So if you needed a quick
Yeah.
solution, you could offer,
As long as you have the money.
to negotiate with a company and perhaps offer a more attractive rate than the $200 we've been paying.
So Chuck, the dilemma is if you don't trust, I don't feel comfortable, just send money and we'll do a great job, trust us. I hate that. Except that the alternative, as I see it, and I'm going to take the hiring the 6, at least in terms of my position, off the table, certainly before the new police chief gets here, and also before we need to have a better business relationship around contracts to really know what we're dealing with. So I'm going to put that one off. That leaves you with 2 options. One is do nothing and just trust that it's going to hold together for 12 months. Or maybe you could do something next fall with funding. It's awkward. Or you contract now, and then basically you assume that the mutual aid, does cost us $600,000 a year. That's the one way you can take the uncertainty out of it.
So you would explicitly not have the discretion to hire 6 full-time paramedics?
I was expressing an opinion as a practical matter, making
because this
permanent
is-
hiring,
this one.
staffing changes before a new fire
Right,
chief
right.
gets in.
Okay.
And before you know that you actually, before, you're on the verge
So
of
you-
negotiating a new contract, so you double down on the staff before you negotiate the contract.
Right. I mean, I'm sorry if I seem like I'm monopolizing the comments, but then what you're asking the author,
Yeah. We want you back.
the authorization you're asking for is, in essence, a short-term, to find a short-term solution so that we're not left without any protection at all, in your opinion?
Yeah,
Okay,
as if
Yeah,
in
yeah.
fact that becomes really important.
okay. All right, thank you.
But you homed in on the right issue. It's like, well, that's pretty murky. You're not telling us what you're really gonna do. It's like, yeah.
And I don't think we should agree to hiring the personnel until you have collective bargaining agreement in place. I think if they won't, maybe, you know, and I'd say file an unfair labor practice. I think it's, the public has a right to a decision. If a decision has to be made to go that direction, I think the issue needs to be brought to a head.
Right. And I'm not saying that we haven't discussed this issue with them, so I'm not saying they haven't wanted to talk about this. I'm just concerned that there's a timing issue if we wait to have a contract in place that could take longer than we anticipate.
Right, and then there is the basic issue of can we go without, for a year or two without ALS service, you know? It's possible that,
When you say that, you mean relying on mutual aid?
yes, or whatever works at the time.
Yeah, I mean, the other, what we have is an intermediate ambulance that gets
No,
people to the
I-
hospital in 10 or 15
Well,
minutes, so that's the other.
I think we have to do
Without
our,
a paramedic on board, so.
I think that would be, personally, I think accepting a degradation of ALS service, I don't think that's what the town wants, but.
I don't think they want it,
Yeah.
but, you know, jump into a situation that is gonna be cost prohibitive or very costly, because you're only dealing with the basic cost, you're not dealing with what's coming down the road with this. And you know it's gonna be more money if you go that
The
way.
issue that will arise if you do that, and somebody who needs ALS service doesn't get it and doesn't make it.
You know, I heard the comment made that one life is one life too many. We lose 35,000 people a year in car crashes. Do we stop driving? There's a certain amount of risk that you have to take in life, that sometimes you have to take chances. You can't solve every problem. If the solution is there, we have to do everything we can to find a solution. If it takes time, I'd rather take the time and find the right solution than to rush into something that's permanent and not the right solution.
For myself, I don't think we're accepting any degradation over what we have. But I think we have options that are not permanent. So it's kind of a moot point.
Yes.
Here's what I have, here's how I have redrafted. Because it sounds like, Gus, you and I are in agreement on number one, except for the money.
Yeah.
Got to figure out the money. It sounds like all three of us are in agreement on number two.
Yep.
And I think we should get to the details of who's on the study committee and the timetable of that and all of that. We're in agreement on number three. I think we're in agreement that if number one, some sort of
Yeah.
ALS thing passes town meeting, we'll put an override on the table.
Yep.
Right? We're not gonna play hardball and say we won't put it on the table. If you want it, you gotta cut it out of some other budget. We won't do that. We'll put the over. So here's number four, which has now been renamed action during study committee, or action during study committee's study, or we'll find a better way to say that. So here's what I have. If the override passes, the Board of Selectmen intends to proceed as follows. First, to rely on other towns' paramedic services for as long as that is a viable option. Second, in the event that reliance on other towns is insufficient to contract with a private ambulance service to provide direct ALS service based in Medfield, while the study committee created under 2 is conducting its work. And then 3, because it sounds like, at least, Gus and Peter are of the view that we shouldn't trust ourselves to make this decision, and to Chuck's point, maybe nobody else should either. Although they do trust the school committee to spend about $32 million every year. But in any event, if the Board of Selectmen concludes that the best solution involves either hiring additional staff or entering into a regional agreement of some kind with other towns, then the board will present that proposed resolution to a future annual town meeting.
Okay, that addresses your concern. I actually like that better. Yeah.
Did you say future annual
Future, I'll take out annual, Mark. Future annual or special.
or just future town?
Future town meeting. I suppose that's the only kind of town meeting that could exist in the circumstances. Future's probably unnecessary.
And I
We'll
wouldn't-
present the proposed resolution to a town meeting.
And I wouldn't require that the ALS service be based in town. I mean,
We didn't.
well.
I had it in there, but I'll take that out. To provide direct ALS service while the study committee created. To provide ALS service, let's say, to provide ALS service at a level no lower than that currently being provided through reliance on other towns, while the study committee conducts its work.
That sounds good. Can you print to
Actually, I like
the
that better
town
than-
printer?
Thank
I
you.
can email it to somebody who can. And then, so the only question then is, on the motion then, Gus, is the number and then whether we want to add, just to the issue you had raised to make clear, I mean, I suppose number 4 moots the need to be more specific in the motion, right? It says authorized to expend such funds, provided the appropriation is contingent upon the approval, right? And we're making clear in number 4 how we would expend those funds pending a future.
It might be helpful in the explanation of the article to make that point, so
Right.
people understand what the words
Well, we're
are.
going to have to deliver a report on what we're saying.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but I think at least this would get people, all right, so let's argue about the number then.
So
And I'm inclined not to argue, actually, given that we're not going to be making a permanent solution. I'm perfectly fine with 500,000. And I bet you we could find a private service to do it for 500,000.
I like it, $150,000 better than $650,000.
All right,
So,
so
okay.
can I email this to you, Christine, or?
We'll print it out right now. Yeah.
And you can print it out, and we can just get agreement on this.
So in terms of going forward then, who's going to talk about this Article 15?
So I think, I mean, Christine, you, some combination of you and the chief and Jeff, or who's
So
involved?
On
we're-
the Board of
talking-
Selectmen, we need someone assigned to it.
I'm happy to talk about it,
Go ahead, Mike, you've done the drafting here.
Okay.
That makes
but
sense.
I'm happy to have one of you talk about it.
So I think one of the things the fire chief and I met for a few hours around this today is we're doing a one-page fact sheet that will be given out to everybody as they come in. People are always reading the articles that don't interest them. I think it will be helpful for them to have a definition of the terms that we talk about. What is mutual aid? What is intercept service? What is BLS, ALS? And then a timeline of how we got to this point. And we'll give that out to everybody. We were doing that in lieu of doing a full presentation in honor of the time we are trying to move this along. I think the discussion piece of this is going to be so long, I don't want to keep people waiting with a basic introduction when we can do that on the fact sheet, I think, would be
Will the
better.
fact sheet be objective fact sheet, or is there an advocacy tone to it?
It is, so that is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. The fact sheet right now is just going to be facts. It is just going to be definition of terms and the timeline of how we got from when we first started the fire department to where we are now. The warrant committee would like to, on the back of it, put what they see as the options available at town meeting. So the question is whether or not, and I will put on the front of our sheet that this was prepared by the Board of Selectmen as informational only. And on the back, if the warrant committee has what they feel are their options, then there will be, wording at the bottom. This page is presented by the warrant committee, so that it's clear that we're not advocating for any policy, just facts at this point.
Okay.
If that's okay with everybody. And then Jeff, the police chief, and I will be available if there's any other.
Do the selectmen want to have a handout sheet as well?
Well, that's what the fact sheet would be.
Well, and I wonder whether
As a-
we ought to hand out our resolution as well, if we've adopted this resolution.
I've killed so many trees this year for town meeting, bring it on. I'm gonna go to my Tree City meeting in shame.
After a 100-page warrant report, what's another page?
It's like beef cattle, they're grown to be paper.
Yeah.
All right. Well, email that to you, Christine.
I'll print it right now.
And so if we can get agreement on that.
And do you want to print that and we can put it all together as a handout for everybody? We can,
Yeah, I think.
do you want to do
I
that?
think at least people will know what we're proposing, what our motion will be. And I think we should deliver a report as well, but.
Correct. Yeah.
At least they can look at it and say, here's what they've agreed to. And we can remind ourselves next week what we've agreed to as well. So we don't have to rely on Bill to tell us what we've done.
So then on the, why don't we move through some of the other
Some of the
warrant
easier
articles?
ones.
Mike, do you want one of us to be responsible on the capital budget? We don't have a capital budget member any longer.
Yes, either that or Chris is on the capital budget committee if you wanted to have her do it, or she's
Chris
been
do it,
a member.
okay. And then 16,
Article
bylaw for
16,
municipal affordable housing trust.
I think that's another one that Mike has done a lot of research on. I don't know how.
Yeah, I would, so I mean, I think for us, I think the 16 and 17 are together. And I think we're all in favor of 16, creating the
I'm in
trust.
favor of both of them myself.
Me too.
On board with 16 and 17?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd be willing to speak on these. I don't know, if someone else wanted to, I would defer, but I would be willing to speak. And I've had some discussion with Christine and kind of putting together what we might say in support of this, but
Okay.
I don't want to monopolize it either. So Pete, if you want to speak on it, I can work with you on the presentation as well, but I'd be happy to.
I've got you down.
I would think it would be one of the other review for, or both of you, even for that matter. There's a couple things. One is, there's clearly a safe harbor in the second year question, I think is an argument for the trust, and you can speak to what it took to get the safe harbor in the first year. The only suggestion I have on 16 is to make it clear that it is community and affordable housing. So it does address the seniors who do not qualify from an income standpoint.
Right.
You don't want to get, I understand they related, and that 17 enables 16.
Right.
Immediately enables it.
Right.
But there's sound reasons to have 16 just as a matter of good municipal planning, whether or not it gets funded, so.
Right.
Right.
No, I think we would have, if they come up, I think we'd have I think they should be voted separately. And so I
They
think,
have to be, yeah.
so I think we would do 16, but what the trust would do, and then the harder question is 17, because it involves the money. And so, I mean, the presentation I'm talking about is, maybe we split them up separately. I'm talking about doing one on the money, and why we
Right.
should be in favor of the money.
Oh, maybe Pete.
You want to talk about 16, Pete? About
sorry,
just the
which
trust itself?
I if you want to involve me, I understand these trusts and how they work too, so.
Which one are you offering to me?
16.
16? I'm happy to do 16, sure.
Basic bylaw establishing the trust.
And then Mike's got the 17.
So one of the things that was, that I thought was very useful that came out of the affordable housing meeting that we went to this past week was the conversation with Candace about how she is really moving forward, apparently. Tonight, she's getting back her RFPs for people to look at expanding Tilden. I had thought that Tilden was not going to go forward based on my conversation with the person at DHCD, because
Is that the same
I was
as
told
this?
by that person at DHCD that the tax credit financing was just so difficult and protracted to get. She didn't seem to think that was a big deal, so I was very encouraged by her comments at the affordable housing meeting. How about 18 then, maintenance and security at the hospital?
Oh, I'm
Appropriate
sorry,
funds
I
to
was
hire
reading that.
consultants and engineers at 19.
Yeah, those are routine, I think,
Yeah,
at that
okay.
stage, so.
Any update on the movie?
We signed a contract this morning.
Oh, congratulations, good.
And they've moved in already, and they're
They started
moving
doing
in.
some work this morning.
It's the internet for May 2nd to start filming, so all the buzz is out.
Nice.
So Mike, you're doing both 18 and 19?
Yeah, well, and actually, Chris is much more, particularly the maintenance end is much more.
And I think John Thompson will be present to speak on it as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I mean, I assume we're all in favor of it, so I don't know that we
Yep.
need a separate board report.
yeah.
Is this appropriate time to bring up, there's something that's come up today regarding the contract for the movie and will impact this article, and that we're going to have to reduce the amount of, I think, the landscaping that we do at the hospital. We do not have liability insurance on the buildings. And we have not because we have boarded them up and not allowed people in them. We are now opening the 5 of them up to allow the movie to go in there. So in my discussions with Mark, he recommended that we do seek quotes for private liability insurance on those
Public
buildings.
liability.
Public liability, sorry.
So the
So-
movie people are not insured?
So they're insured, and they're insured for $2 million and have named us, but Mark thought in addition, we should be insured as well.
I had thought we had tried to obtain insurance, and we couldn't.
No,
No, I did receive a quote back in 2005. There was some concern about the rating of the insurance company who was willing to insure us for the $26,000 they wanted in return.
Joe's House of Insurance was.
Kind of.
Yes.
We couldn't find a Google search of them.
When this originally came up, Maya said they would not offer us liability insurance, but if we wanted their assistance in getting a quote from the private market, they would try to help us. They said it will be very expensive. You will probably have to go to the reinsurance market because it is very difficult to get insurance on abandoned buildings. So.
So in light of that, I have called the insurance company that Maya had put us in touch with 2 years ago to see if they would re-quote it now, since it's been a few years. And I also called a real estate agent local in town to see if they would provide me a quote, and I have a meeting with them on Monday. So I'll bring that back to you.
insurance brokerage.
So the maintenance request was down 50,000?
It was down
They go back up
50,000.
again, or?
I think at this point, we can leave it where it is.
Okay.
At 100?
Try to absorb it with the landscaping? Okay.
Yeah.
At 100.
I'm sure the
Okay,
warrant committee's happy that you're doing
Article 21, I think we've discussed. Article 22, the parking study, I think that probably will be a dismissal because they have got a grant for it. The grant was for 15,000, they may need another 1,000. If they do, you could take that money out of the downtown because it is for
Just over
downtown.
20, is that gonna be dismissed?
It's a, yes. Article 22 and 23 are dismissals. Article 23 was the one for the Dwight Jervey House. Article 24, you've discussed the Bay Circuit Trail.
23's gone too, right? 23 is dismissed. I just wasn't.
Yes.
My ears weren't.
23 is gone, yes, because
Yep, yep.
Because
No,
we
I-
gave
I
them
know.
money.
you still
Yeah.
have to appropriate the 9,500 remaining in this year's
Yep,
money
yep,
for
okay.
work on the Dwight Jervey House.
Yep.
Article 25 is for the street lighting,
Yeah.
which
Is
I
everybody-
understand you and the warrant committee are recommending favorably.
We didn't vote on it, Mike.
You haven't voted on it
No,
yet?
we
We've
haven't.
not voted on it.
No.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of it.
I am also in favor
I'm
of
in
it.
favor of it.
Okay, I'll talk about that one
I
because I'm
I
familiar
may,
with it.
it'll be a lost cause, but I may just object, so.
Okay.
It is your right as a citizen, Mike.
Mike will buy you a ladder.
As a member of the original Light Committee for 1980. Article 26 is the trapping beaver dams. I guess I can speak on that one. Maybe get a few jokes in. Article 27 is the naming the bridge. That should be routine. Article 28 is routine. That's just taking the money from putting it sewer stabilization. That's been on for several years. Article 29 should be routine. It's just paying back a loan for the ambulance purchase to the stabilization fund. And 30 is routine. That's putting the 400,000 we've been putting into the OPEB trust fund. I was hoping we would have the actuarial report. I will talk to Joy again tomorrow and see if she can get that, because
Okay, good.
they've been at it for a while. They should
Right.
have something on it, even if it's only an estimate at this point.
Right.
I expect that to come down substantially
Yeah, yeah,
now that we have a trust.
At least for one more year.
And we have about 2.1 million currently in the trust. Article 31 and 32, you've already discussed earlier tonight. Article 33 and 34 are the water supply ones. One is the,
33 is water conservation.
is water conservation, and 34 is access to the, to change meters. So, I assume Jeremy will speak on 33, and you're prepared, if necessary, to speak on 33.
Yeah,
You know what's in
Franklin
it.
just passed it this week.
Don't mention that, just say it's Medfield. So,
No, just FYI.
yes. Okay, Article 34, public water supply, yeah, okay. Article 35 is the new figure. Originally, it was 150, but based on their consultant's report, they're asking for 275. That will come out of the sewer enterprise fund. And Jeremy will speak on that one. Article 36 is routine. The only question on that was where the money was going. I think everybody's agreement the money should go to the Water Enterprise Fund. It's $40,000 a year. Okay. Article 37, stormwater management, and 38 is stormwater management. Mark, I think, is in the best position to respond to those, because those are the great big long ones. And that's to bring us into compliance with the 2003 Water Permit Act, which, by the way, despite rumors to the contrary, we're not way behind other communities. Very few have done much in that regard, because it's been tied up in lawsuits ever since and still is. So.
And not only that, but most communities had trouble, as we did, in how you were gonna fund stormwater management in terms of, if you didn't have if you had a small DPW without a town engineer, the Municipal Modernization Act, which only took effect November 16th, now allows you to get fees from applicants to cover outside people to do that, much as with planning board subdivisions, et cetera.
And to set up a separate revolving fee, tax, I guess it would be, on stormwater fee that you're allowed to levy. But we are not proposing that. Okay, 37 is the, okay, we just discussed that, 37, 38. 39 to 47 of the zoning articles, and I think planning board will give reports on all of those.
They have to.
Yes, 48 is the change in the bylaws. That's not a zoning article. It's a change in the general bylaws to prohibit medical marijuana. Recreational marijuana facilities. And Article 49 goes back to the zoning. That's to amend the table to prohibit them in all zoning districts. In
So
Article-
are we all in favor of that one?
Yeah,
Yeah. Who's gonna talk on that one?
you can talk on that one, Pete.
I'll take it, but because you don't have anything. All right.
This is good. I get to
With an
Jump in.
82% vote at the election, I don't think there's much to talk about. Just move the question.
The general bylaw was already in place, was passed at the time of the medicinal marijuana was legalized. I think it was your initiative at the time, but, so we're just amending that to add this provision for addressing non-medical.
And then we'll just have to wait to see what the legislature comes up with in that regard too. So, and then the Article 50 is free cash.
So we have to go back briefly to the ALS article. Sorry,
Which article?
ALS.
15,
Oh, okay, yep. Okay.
so, sorry.
No, I had something else, Evelyn and I just, it's always fun to read the warrant after you send it to the printer.
And you can't do anything
How
about it.
bad is it?
It's the autocorrect that does it.
No, I was ridiculously, probably bizarrely excited about our new pass-fail in the back. Only I realized that they forgot to put the actual page number of the article. So the index doesn't really help you as much as I anticipated.
Oh.
It has the article number though. Yeah.
You could give people, while they're listening.
Half a loaf is better than none.
Yeah, they can write it. Just put up on the screen, just fill in the numbers on your page.
Considering what you guys did to them, they did pretty well. So we just sent it at the last minute, and not your fault, but it was.
Yeah, I'll talk to them.
Okay, did a remarkable job. And you guys did a remarkable job as well. So.
All right, so here's what we need to go back to the charter of the study committee. So,
Okay.
the way the resolution is drafted is there's two different charter versions depending upon whether the warrant committee's dismissal motion passes or whether the Board of Selectmen's motion passes. So the question is, number one, do you guys agree with that construct? Number two, if not, or if so, we should agree on what the charter of the committee is.
Can you reiterate that why there have to be two? Why it's not just the same committee trying to figure out the same thing?
The only question is the timing. So we could eliminate the timing element of it, and so the only question would be, and this was trying to honor the warrant committee's approach of the study committee reporting back for next year's annual town meeting. And so if that's not a priority, then we can leave the timing of it out. And so that was the reasoning around the two different charters was purely around the timing of the reports. So otherwise, so the membership, the purpose, the rest would be the same. It's just the deliverable schedule piece of it that I think might be impacted by the difference. And I have this up as well, so I can edit the charter.
Could you just make it a not later than date? And cover both? You know,
Well, what we could do is, if we took, the deliverable schedule and deleted the last three sentences there. So the deliverable initial report and recommendation of the Board of Selectmen by December 1st, 2017.
You're gonna leave that there, or?
Well, I mean, that's, I mean, if you're gonna have an option to have this before the 2018 annual town meeting, I think that's the date.
Yeah,
To have it go through the warrant committee and the rest of it.
yeah.
We could do on the schedule sort of an if-then, in that if the report that's delivered on December 1st includes a permanent recommendation, it would also include a proposed article for town meeting, whether there's additional funding, whatever else whatever that would be. It could be the report means here's what we've done, but we need another 6 months. And so, it's really, the question is, do we say the objective is to get to the town meeting in 2018, or do we leave that out? And I really don't have a view. I mean, I think I'm skeptical of the possibility of reaching a regional solution for next year's town meeting. Skeptical to the point of thinking it's highly unlikely. But if
But if you decide the regional solution is the real proper solution, I don't think anybody's gonna be bothered by the fact that the contracts aren't signed by a certain date next year in the spring, so that
I would even put that more strongly. I think this is a committee that should be telling us what the right thing for the town to do is.
Yeah.
When we get that answer, and you don't need more than a year to figure that answer out, it would be reasonable to say, we'd like, if there's a reason you can't figure it out by the 1st of December, then that's why this is an initial report. The implementation of the recommendation or the best approach is going to be whatever that implementation is. Yeah, I think you're right. If it's full-blown regionalization, then we know where we're trying to go, and it's a matter of how do we move there. If it's an issue of, gee, there's one other town that's also trying to do this at the same time, we may have a hiring plan that we want to implement the following fiscal year. But rather than trying to get all the way out to the implementation of it, simply getting a coherent statement of what our intent is probably all we need from this committee.
Chris, what's the likely hoped for date by which we would have a new fire chief selected?
I think, it's 4 to 5 months from right now.
Okay, well, so
Best
that
case
person
scenario.
will have some input then, before the report comes back to us, so that's good.
So then it sounds like, so your view, and Pete, your view, and I don't mean to put words in either of your mouths, but that essentially, under the purpose deliverable, it can just end after Medfield and nothing else. The committee should deliver initial report and recommendation to the Board of Selectmen by December 1st, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Where you ended it, Mike?
After Medfield, so eliminating those three follow-on sentences.
These three.
Oh,
So that's it.
yeah, that works for me.
Mhm.
Do you agree with the composition of the committee?
Yeah, I think that what you came up with was fine for that.
Yeah, I think that's good. Interesting enough, I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten actually people reaching out who would like to be on this committee that have strong backgrounds in this area. So I don't think we'll have a hard time finding qualified people who want to be involved in it.
You know, I've had
Yeah,
similar
yeah.
inquiries, so.
You know, one thing with a committee like that, you have to be careful it isn't dominated by people who've already made up their minds. You need to have
Right.
people with
Right.
varying points of view on it so they can work it out.
Right. No, I agree. That's why, I mean, we have, you know, one paramedic who's not a member of the fire department. And then I think we have kind of basically three other, one chosen by the warrant committee and two chosen by us, so kind of that large, Christine plus the police chief.
Yeah.
And is there a member of the Board of Selectmen willing to serve on this committee?
Yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
Just want to make sure before we.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, so.
I don't have to talk about any of the articles at town meetings, so I probably should do something around it.
We'll give you much more work to do. All right,
You don't
so,
have to stand for reelection.
all right, so it sounds like we're good on the charter.
I could do the heavy lifting and the contract stuff.
Yeah, we still have a left-hander on the board.
So Christine, I'll email you now the finale of the charter for us to review and of the resolution, because I noticed a missing word in the resolution. I've got to edit this to reflect the charter. And should we put in the date of the proposed override, or should we leave that open, Mike?
I would leave that up to the
Town
town clerk, I think, yeah. Just to work out, schedule with the ballots and the voter registration and everything else, so,
And then she'd make a recommendation and we would vote the date.
yeah.
Okay.
So you set with that then, Mike?
Yeah, I got to email it to Christine.
Yeah, okay.
The-
Can we go on?
Yeah, one other thing I'd suggest you might want to do on that is start thinking about what you want to put in a charge to the committee,
Well, that's-
because that's going to be very critical.
That's what we have.
That's it.
Community charter. You think it should be longer?
The what?
Should be longer.
It depends, you know.
There's a,
Specific you
there's a
wanna
more,
get in terms.
there's a more detail, you know, if I'm on this committee, I'll take care of the more detailed
yeah.
scoping of it, consistent with what the committee wants to do, but
Yep.
for this, I think this is pretty good for describing it
For starting,
at this
yeah.
point in the process, though, yeah. But I agree, we can be more specific.
So then our next item on our agenda is to review and provide comments for the 67 North Street LIP application from ZBA.
So you've already made extensive comments on this twice. So I would assume at this point, you would just echo your previous comments.
Yep.
And I have no inputs, right?
Yep.
That's one I have. a
And then
copy.
the next item, I guess, is yours, Chris, too. Discuss fire chief search committee.
This is, actually why I was late to your meeting. I was meeting with the personnel board. They were finalizing the fire chief selection process that you requested.
Thank you.
They have recommended a list of people that they believe should be on the committee as well. So the process actually tracks very close to the police chief selection process that we did about 10 years ago. The only difference in this is that we will work with hiring the public safety management consultant at the onset. Last time we waited till we were about a month in before we hired them. I've already reached out to two of the more well-known firms to ask for proposals and to explain to them that we wanted to expedite the process so we could move up in the queue. So hopefully I'll hear from them in the next few days.
They basically design the assessment centers.
Correct. And they'll design that with input from the selection committee. What we did in the past is we ran public hearings to find out what people were looking for in the fire chief. We asked department heads, we asked existing personnel within the fire department, and then put that together within the design and what we were looking for in the outcome of a selection of a fire chief. Were there certain characteristics or certain criteria that the committee was looking for?
Have they updated the job description and the salary range for the position?
The salary range was updated when we did the reclassification for exempt employees last year. So we have no issue with that at this point, and we'll start working on the job description once the committee is selected. The committee will have some input into that. One of the things you may want to talk about, which has been recommended to us unofficially, is that you create a residency requirement for the fire chief.
Yeah, I'd say that's absolutely mandatory. It's the one position I think you have to have, they have to be a resident.
I don't know that that's absolutely necessary, Mike, myself, but
They have to be the first person at a fire,
yeah, okay.
and they need to be in town to be the first person. They're supposed to arrive before the fire trucks.
Yeah, I know that other towns don't do it that way. That's why, I don't obviously know how to run a fire department.
I think
but-
in a small town where we have, in a small department like that, it's definitely a characteristic that people have.
What
Talked
what
about
impact
having.
does it
That's
likely
going
to
to have
have?
a huge narrowing of the candidates if you do
Well, I
that,
think
of course.
you would give the opportunity for someone to have 12 to 18 months within to
Move
move
in.
to town.
Yeah.
I think my,
You would have to give some cushion to that.
yeah, my concern would be that if you didn't have it, you would have to hire a second sort of officer, like a deputy chief or somebody, so that one of them was always here.
Right.
As I
And
understand, you
you
don't
do have a
really have
deputy
one.
chief now on the call side.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's the same issue of.
Correct.
Call, and, I mean, you need to have a permanent, full-time employee, one of the two, because as I understand, there's not, I think a lot of, but you only have two people on at a time, you don't really have a, command staff the way you'd have it in larger towns, so.
Would the likely, I know we haven't done this in a long time, so maybe you don't know the answer to this question. But are the likely candidates going to be like lieutenants who want to move up to chief? You're not going to get a chief from another town. I'm trying to figure out what the incentives are for somebody to just pack up and move somewhere in 12 to 18 months.
We talked about that actually tonight at the
Yep.
personnel board meeting, and our feeling is that you would be, most of the people applying for this job would be looking to move from a lieutenant or a deputy
So they're
chief's
looking for
position
the,
to a
so they do
full
it for the
position.
promotion, okay. Okay. Does
So
the
I
town
guess-
offer relocation or anything
We
like
do
that?
not.
I guess on that residency criteria, I would leave that up to the selection.
Correct. I was just throwing it out there as something you may want to start thinking about
Yep.
as part of that.
So would we have to pick the residents at large on this committee?
Yes, in the past, you have asked for interested parties to contact either you or myself to submit their resumes as to their interest in the committee, and then you've chosen that as well. We tried to keep the size of the committee somewhat manageable, but the personnel board, Bob and Debbie also felt that there were certain people that had to be on the committee that were department heads that work very closely with the fire chief currently.
And so the current retired fire chief on the list, that's someone from a different town?
Usually you find somebody who's an active chief in a different town or recently retired who can weigh some expertise for the committee. Where you're hiring the public safety management consultant, that's probably not as necessary. So if you wanted to do a third resident at large, I don't think that would be an issue for the personnel board.
Yeah. As I recall, that was very helpful with the police chief selection committee, though. We had the chief from Westwood on, I believe.
Correct,
And he
Chief
was
Chase.
very helpful, yeah.
Somebody that understands command, staff, and
Mhm.
all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
And when the public safety consultant runs the assessment center, they design it with retired fire chiefs and or current fire chiefs to assist in that process. So you do have that expertise for there as well.
Before a decision is made, does the fire department, the staff in the fire department, is there any input?
So when we did the police chief one, we solicited their input at the beginning, what they were looking for
Okay.
in the next chief.
Would you do something similar?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. And we did that with all department heads. I think we had 2 public hearings with residents, plus the internal staff and department heads.
Okay.
I remember it was a former Waltham police chief, wasn't it, who was our expert?
Correct. Steve Unsworth, who,
And he actually rode around with some of our officers in the
Mhm.
cruisers and things.
Mhm.
He gathered a huge amount of useful information.
it was an incredible process to have undergone. It's good.
So do we need to do anything with this, or just, you want us to
I think
approve
if
it?
you,
or-
I'd like to start moving on this.
I'd like you to.
I know. Hopefully I'll hear from the consultant soon, but I think if we can start to at least form the committee, if you want to start soliciting people who would be interested in serving on the committee,
Absolutely.
we can, by your next meeting in May, form the committee and start moving.
So if anybody in the town has an interest in serving on the fire chief selection committee, please get in touch with Chris here at the townhouse.
And Chris, what's the estimated cost and the source of funds for this?
We're doing a reserve fund transfer, and I'm anticipating no more than 20,000.
Okay.
And are we okay with this as it's laid out here?
Do you may not have it yet, but do you have any kind of a general timeline on what happens when?
I don't, in looking at some of the other timelines, I can send you a draft of what I'm thinking, but a total about 4 to 5 months.
Okay.
Any more questions?
This looks good to me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks for putting it together, Chris.
you're welcome.
So I sent you the final resolution and charters, so we.
Okay, we put those up now.
Thank you.
So then back on our agenda, the town administrator update.
Yeah, a couple of items. Tomorrow night at 5 o'clock in the Millis Library, there'll be a Charles River Natural Valley Storage Area Master Plan informational meeting. I've notified all the various town boards and committees that might have an interest. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in.
I think Bill actually is probably reviewed it more than John Thompson and I have even had a chance to review it in the last week, so he may want to speak to this.
I'll give you a quick, So basically, the Army Corps of Engineers is updating the 1984 plan, master plan for the Natural Valley Storage Area, Charles River. The meeting is tomorrow night. I did a quick read, basically from non-technical point of view, of course, but I saw one item basically of concern to Medfield. I didn't see anything else that jumped out as something that would, negatively impact the town or any of our concerns. But I did also get an email today from the Charles River Watershed Association, and they've sent out an alert about the meeting tomorrow night. Their concerns are, there's a statement in there from the Corps in the new plan, a very general statement about open space development for recreational opportunities. So Charles River appears to have keyed on that particular statement, and they're trying to get some of their members to attend the meeting. I didn't see anything specifically that, again, that would impact Medfield. There was a comment, though, when they talked about the existing resources and why they thought they needed to improve them, and they talked about canoe launch in the area, and they said that Area G, which is our area, along with Millis, Norfolk, Sherborne, and Walpole, there are canoe and kayak launch sites, and 3 of these are maintained by the town of Medfield. And I thought that was worth a review by the appropriate Medfield authorities to see if we are, in fact, aware of the fact that we have maintenance responsibility according to the Corps of Engineers.
I don't
This is
think. I don't know.
Causeway Street, West Street, and the Route 27 bridge. And the one that struck me the most was the Route 27 bridge, because it was my understanding that as part of our mediation settlement for the cleanup of the C&D area, DCAM agreed to put in an emergency launch facility to replace the one at the Route 27 bridge. So you may want to check that with the police and fire.
I think the one they're talking about, maybe there was an Eagle Scout project where an Eagle Scout put right next to the 27 bridge. I think what you may be referring to, there was an emergency access at where the model airplane field is.
No, that's the new one, Mike.
Yes.
That's the one that was to...
That's still under the state's jurisdiction.
Yeah, police and fire were using the one by Route 27 by the bridge, and it was totally unsuitable. And so during our negotiations for the cleanup, the settlement agreement,
the police and fire and the committee and DCAM agreed that they would put the one by the model airplane field. So now the question becomes, as far as the Corps of Engineers is concerned, though, their new master plan says that the town is maintaining 3 launches. And those were the 3 that I identified. I sent Christine an email with this information in it, so you might want to check it out. So again, I'll say it again. As far as the Corps is concerned in the new master plan, that they've asked the appropriate stakeholders to comment on, Medfield is responsible for Causeway Street, West Street, and the Route 27 bridge. So you'll need to get comments back to the Corps of Engineers by the 15th of June if you don't agree with that. The other comment I made was that they do not talk about the new launch, and they do not talk about the kayak launch down at the overlook area at the Charles. So they talk about the existing launches. They also don't talk about the Charles River Link Trail. So those were the only things that I saw that I would add. They were more along the lines of, you're not adequately describing what exists now. And if the town wishes to make a comment about that, or to say that, we're not responsible for these areas, you should get that into the...
Probably the use of the term voluntary might be appropriate, because, we don't want to be committed to a maintenance responsibility if it's something we choose to do, as we have done in recent years, either with a combination of Highway and Eagle Scout project doing it, then that's one thing. But to be required to do it as part of a master plan, I think is different. I think
I think you may want to check with the chief,
yeah,
perhaps, and a couple of the other individuals, and get someone to send out comments from the town. If you want to change it to believe me, there's nothing voluntary in the master plan that's written by the Corps. It does not say voluntary.
Yes, it's everything they do is voluntary. They don't have to do
correct.
anything if they don't want to.
Yes.
So, I did have an inquiry from a resident who was concerned about the procedure for removing your property from a floodplain. And I've advised her of this hearing. When she called the Army Corps to find out about it, they say, "Oh, that's the town. Call the town. We've given them information on it." And I think this was the information they gave, which didn't have anything to do with that particular portion.
You're talking about getting the flood map off, changing your flood
Yes,
map?
getting off the flood map. I know we had one down on Spring Street.
Town's got no say in that at all.
Yes, and
No,
it's
you have to file with the,
it's a very lengthy procedure. You have to have engineered plans, and you have to show aerial photographs of wetlands delineations and all kinds of other stuff.
or you wait till the next flood map. If something's changed, you have to wait till the next flood
Well,
map.
the issue is,
I went through that down,
once
missed
they
it.
put you within the
Yeah.
floodplain, then you're required to carry
Right.
flood insurance at a prohibitive annual premium.
Yes, yeah, and this one individual said the flood insurance is about $2,000 a year, and they didn't feel that, they felt that part of their lot was in the floodplain, but the house was not, and they had never had a flooding problem.
You basically need to engage your own engineer, and then they will do that over the,
But it's the flood map that defines that.
I know, those are in error.
They're
Then
not,
you have
they're
to, but
they're
then you
not
have to go
always
for an
accurate.
amendment, and the rules for an amendment are
Yes.
different than.
And they can change over time, too, floodplains meander and wander, rivers wander.
Basically, the enforcement is your mortgagee. That's who the feds put the pressure on under the
Mhm.
federal
Right,
mortgage programs.
right.
So therefore, they're the ones that notify you that you have to be on the flood
Right.
map. If you
Yeah.
dispute it,
Pay off your
they
mortgage.
have their own consultants that you present your material to, and if they determine on behalf of the bank that, yes, you're right, it's not within the floodplain, then they can give you the waiver to have that insurance.
Well, I called this particular individual and advised him in this meeting tomorrow night, so she's aware.
There is absolutely nothing
Right.
relating to floodplain
Right.
in the master plan. It is basically about how they are going to manage the future use of the floodplain storage area to satisfy public requests for recreation and utilization. So it's,
Well, then why are they telling us that we are, they have informed us about it?
Well, again, basically, I mean, they're giving you the opportunity to sit there and listen to what they have to say and make your comments. So I said, the Charles River will make their comments about being, about overuse, which they've always had. I would suggest, as far as the floodplain issue goes, I've sat in several Concom meetings where the accuracy of the floodplain maps have come into question, and the lawyers for the proponents appearing before the Concom have applied to certain agencies to get it resolved. So Leslie may be able to provide some guidance as to who to talk to or who this person
I
might talk to.
did put this individual in touch with Leslie also, so.
It's fine. That's it. That's all I got.
And I have no doubt she will be able to speak for herself.
So, Mike, did you want to make a comment about Mo Goulet's memo about the wastewater treatment plant?
Yes, I just wanted to let you know that, a couple of weeks ago when we had the heavy rains, we had a condition where we were unable to handle the increased flow in the plant, and with the proper detention time, so we had to release water before it was treated for the full detention period. We did contact EPA and DEP and worked with them. They came out and went over a plan with us, and they've approved temporary measures, and we have to report 3 times, test 3 times a week and report to them weekly. So it is in progress. What we have to do to bring us into complete compliance, we are changing upgrading our ultraviolet treatment system, and as soon as that's done, we should be in full compliance. But in the meantime, this is working out fine.
Okay, selectmen's reports. Mike?
Just very briefly, I wanted to thank John Ouellette from the Department of Public Works. I was at the transfer station on Saturday and noted that the sign posted had the date of town meeting correct, and I pointed it out to him, and he fixed the date of town meeting on the sign. And so if anybody thought it was April 27th, it's April 24th, but I appreciated their quick attention to getting the date.
It was very hard to read when I went down. The sun was shining in the sign.
Well, we had to go stand at an angle and look at it to be able to see, but when you were driving in, you could see that it said it was.
Yeah.
So I appreciated his quick work in fixing that, and that was
Gus,
my
anything to report?
Beyond the number of emails that I've gotten with people who are willing to help out with the ALS issue, they have been very constructive, and I've appreciated the enthusiasm there. The only other point I would make is that in the first meeting that I attended, there were 31 pages of reading, and I was thinking I could handle it, but then there were 69 for this meeting, so I'm anxiously waiting for the next meeting.
I would just mention that I had made a follow-up inquiry about a tree map for the downtown, based on Richard DeSorga's representation that there was such a map, and we went around and around about whether it really existed or not, and apparently Bobby Kennedy found something. And so that if anybody is interested, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Highway Garage, Bobby Kennedy Jr., Richard DeSorga, Mike Leaders, and I are going to meet and go and look at tree sites in the downtown.
And probably we should, for those who are not aware, it was reported over the weekend that Senator Timilty is about to resign his seat in the Senate in order to become Norfolk County Treasurer. And so there will probably be a special election in the fall to fill that seat. No date has been
There
set.
will actually be two elections, I'm sorry.
There'll be a
primary
primary, and that election, being a state election, will be by party. There'll be a Republican primary and a Democratic primary, as opposed to a town election where there's no partisan ballot. And there were already several names being bandied about, including a Medfield resident. So anyone that's interested, might be interested in the position, you better get on the bandwagon fast, because they're already jumping on.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounded like there were half a dozen people already lined up.
Yes. He's been a very good senator. He was very helpful to us on the state hospital, and it's going to be a loss. So
Approval of the minutes. I had the one correction that I sent to everybody. Any other issues?
I had one additional correction that I didn't get a chance to send to Evelyn, and that was just on the, trying to dig it out here now, on the entry with respect to Tony Santori. Let's see. So, I'll wait for Evelyn to find it. It's just a correction to the minutes. So in the entry on Tony Santori, I would strike the second half of the last sentence there and change it so it reads, Selectman Marcucci suggested this item be deferred until the board determines what role the Senior Housing Study Committee will have going forward, and whether, in light of that role, there is still a potential conflict. And then I would just change the previous sentence from, on his behalf, acknowledging that, on his behalf, requesting that the board waive a potential conflict. So it should read, Senior Housing Study Committee Chairman Tony Santori requests the selectmen vote to file a disclosure statement with the town clerk on his behalf, acknowledging that the board waives a potential conflict, not that he waives the conflict. His request is to the board that we waive the conflict.
So with those,
Requesting that the board.
Yes.
so is there a motion then to accept the minutes with those changes?
I would move to accept the minutes with the changes earlier provided by Selectman Peterson and just stated by me.
Can I second? I wasn't there, but I'll second it.
Oh, well, I'll second it then, if you don't want to. All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And then under informational, Mike, Chris, anything? Remarkable decision by the ZBA on Country Estates, 29 pages, single space, reminded me of why I wanted to leave the ZBA.
I was wondering how much of
I
that
don't
is
have
boilerplate.
I think Mark
that much.
Bobrowski threw that together. I think Mark Bobrowski actually threw that together.
Oh,
And then we have the final version of the resolution here that Christine has
I gave
handed
that to you.
us. So I would move that we adopt the resolution.
Do you want me to print for town meeting the resolution and the charter on the other side as one document? So that people can see that as well?
I mean, I think that would be fine.
And then we'll have a fact sheet on one side of our printing and the warrant committee's options on the other side of theirs. So we'll have two handouts regarding ALS that we can put together.
As I've mentioned, I'll be meeting with the moderator, town clerk, and the chairman of the warrant committee Friday at 8:30 in my office, if any of you care to attend, to go over the final procedures for town meeting, so.
It's Friday at 8:30.
And we should remind everybody that town meeting is next Monday at 7:30 in the high school gymnasium, so urge them to attend.
Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to indicate, I was going through my papers earlier today and noted that 2011 was the last time, I believe, that I asked you to update designations of special municipal employees. To the extent there have been any kind of ad hoc committees set up since then, we need to update that, maybe when committees get reappointed.
Oh, speaking of which, I have lists ready to go for you to do your committee reappointments so that you can do them not long after town meeting. You can do it
So at the
sooner this
same
year.
time, we should probably, because if you don't take you actually affirmatively have to designate the committees as special municipal employees for ethics purposes. If you don't do it, even if it's inadvertent, the Ethics Commission will treat them as full municipal employees subject to the entire panoply of obligations under 268A.
So that's one of those things that we should have on our annual calendar to do after.
To the extent
town
you're
meeting
setting
every
up
year.
committees, yeah, it's very, tough to keep track of It should be done almost every time, when you set something up.
So why don't we just put it when we do the annual reappointments? Do
Yeah.
it.
Right.
It seems to
And
make
can you,
sense to
can
do
you
it.
go through the committees, Mark, and give us a recommendation as to the committees that qualify to be?
Everybody who's a volunteer committee does. It's certainly the
Qualifies.
uncompensated ones, and that's pretty much what we're talking about.
Okay,
Any of the study committees, so-called,
okay.
But elected officials would all be regular municipal.
no. The only exceptions are like the Board of Selectmen by statute and the town administrator, people that are full-time paid employees generally are not, and the selectmen are not by statute. You can't be a special municipal employee. Everybody else can be if the selectmen so designate.
Okay, so we should do that afterwards. Oh, then finally, have we settled on a May meeting schedule yet?
No,
Okay,
you're not available on May 2nd?
right. And then again, you can meet without me, obviously, but,
May 4th, that's Thursday. This room would be available.
I mean, I have in my calendar May 16th as
Well,
a,
that would be the next regular
right.
meeting.
And so, I mean, I will be back in the country on May 4th, and so it's up to Pete and Gus if they want to
I think I was fine on the.
be free of me for the first meeting in May, then we can stay with the second. Otherwise, I certainly don't want to shirk missing a meeting, and so I'd be happy to meet on the 4th and be back. And
Yeah, I think we were concerned, when's graduation? Do we know when graduation is this year?
It's usually not till June.
Not till June.
yeah, it's either
Usually the
First
week of June.
weekend in
I
June.
think it's June 4th,
Yeah.
Sunday, June 4th, or June 11th.
They start to get pretty busy around that time, and it's tough to get the,
Yeah,
Postpone.
the athletic director wasn't able to find out from the basketball team, if they'd be available they're not available on the 16th,
Okay.
but
We don't know
maybe
about the 4th.
23rd or the first meeting in June.
Okay,
So I won't know that till next week.
okay.
All right, but it's confirmed you'd like to meet on the 4th of May?
That's fine.
I do have 3 applications for solicitors in Medfield.
soliciting for cable TV or?
No, Anderson Windows, another solar company, 2 solars. No, solar and, they were in Medfield last year. Home improvement products. So 3 different,
So May 4 works for me, too.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we
Sorry,
will
I
have our
had to
usual
flip it.
meeting Monday in the library before
yes,
the.
what time would you like
meeting.
to be posted, 6:30 or?
Sure, 6:30.
You would type.
Where?
And the warrant committee usually posts a meeting at the same time in case there's any.
Can you fix that,
separate
Christina,
meeting,
reprint it?
if you wanna.
You have to give it back to me, though.
Will you
Okay.
send us your final version of that, so?
Well, Christine has.
I have it.
You
She has
Yep.
it. So I would move that we adopt this resolution with the one correction, deleting "is" in the last second of the second bullet under 4. Thank you, Gus. So,
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
all right.
Yep. Anything else? Can we go to dinner?
6:30 Monday night in the library.
Yep.
That's the high school library, not library across the street. It's the high school library.
And then I would move that we adjourn.
Second.
No? Do we have something else we
No,
have
I
to
think
do?
I'm good.
You sure?
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV.